Hello, my name is Abigail, and this is the Polyglot Progress Podcast. Today is August 10th, 2020, and this is episode 41, Recent Realisations. I guess that will be the title we go with. So this week marks 5 months from the last time that I went into the job that I had pre-COVID, and so it kind of feels like a nice time to kind of reflect back on all of the things that I feel like I've learned about myself and about my language learning throughout this kind of quarantine time. And also now is a good time for this, I think, because I have also seemingly found a new job. I'm doing trial shifts, so I guess I'm not technically hired yet, but I've at least found a place that seems pretty promising at the moment, and I've been working, so it kind of feels like the end of that kind of quarantine at home, focusing a little bit more on languages time for me, which obviously was the goal, but is a little bit sad when it comes to my language learning. But I feel like I, in the past 5 months, have learned a lot about myself when it comes to my language learning, my study habits, and just general things related to my language learning, specifically because I had so much more time to do it than I have previously, but I think a lot of other things that are more pandemic related kind of played into that as well. So I just wanted to have like a little chat, sort of. It's going to definitely be one of the more casual podcasts where I just kind of talk about things that I've noticed, things that have been going on, and that sort of thing. And obviously this podcast is also a little bit less universal, I guess. This is definitely more of a podcast focused on my personal experiences. So as a disclaimer, this is not to make light of COVID by any means. I also realize that there's a bit of privilege that comes with this position of being able to have had these realizations because I wasn't an essential worker working in hospitals, things like that. I also don't think any of us really needed to be productive during this time at home. If you needed to take time to solely focus on your mental health because of everything that's going on, or just play Animal Crossing, or just kind of do things to keep your mind off of everything that's going on, again, totally fine. There were lots of days where I did similar things to that, but I did like getting to use the time as a way to kind of return to certain hobbies that I haven't really had time for previously, language learning being one of them. And I think in this time, because I was doing so much more language learning than I have previously, or at least have in this past year, and I guess 2 years probably at this point is the best kind of marker for last time I had like a good chunk of time to work on languages, and also just had a bit more time with myself to kind of reflect on things. I think I learned a lot of lessons about myself as a language learner, so just wanted to talk about those. I think the quarantine, stay at home, isolation, whatever you want to call it, definitely isolated all of us, clearly, but I think as a result of that, spending that much time with myself really just revealed a lot about my life, about my mental state, about things that I do or feelings that I have, and kind of what triggers those things. And I think that as I returned to language learning in those times, and not only just returned, but focused to language learning in those times, it definitely taught me a lot about how I learn languages, why I learn languages, the ways that I learn languages, what makes me feel certain ways when learning languages. And I think all of that is very important, obviously, but I think it's really going to be interesting now as I transition to working, because I've learned these things, but it is kind of within this bubble of being home all the time and not really going out at all. I literally didn't go to a grocery store until I think last month. I managed to avoid things to that degree. So I definitely was living in a tiny little bubble, avoiding COVID, which is great, but definitely had way more time there to learn languages and do language stuff and focus on my own projects than I would normally. And so I think the real interesting thing and the real learning is going to come kind of next, where I'm transitioning to working again, and I'm kind of applying those things and learning how they fit in within more of my normal lifestyle. Obviously, it's not going to be fully normal. I'm not going to have a lot of things that were happening in my life before. Also, my life has just changed a lot. Like, I typically around this time of year would be getting ready to go back to school, and I guess about 2 weeks from now is typically when I moved in. So it's going to be very strange not having that happen. I think even over the summer, it's always a little bit different for me when it comes to my language learning and stuff because I'm not balancing all of the things. But obviously, as I move into this time of working, I'm only going to be working. I'm not going to be going to school at the same time, and that's not a COVID thing. That's just a life thing. I'm not going to be playing roller derby. That one definitely is a COVID thing. And just kind of things like that where my life is definitely shifting because of the pandemic and not because of the pandemic. And that's all going to change my language learning, but I think the going back to things is definitely going to be where things are interesting because I've learned kind of all of these things and had all these realizations during a time where I'm not going out of the house. I don't have as many commitments. I've been volunteering, but it's 1 day a week and it's not super impeding on my life, I guess. I've definitely had way more time to be committing to doing language projects, to working on Polyglot progress stuff, which I will talk about later, but I feel like has a very big role in my language stuff as well. And I just think it's going to be a bit of a test for myself, I think is the best way to put it, with applying all of these things as I kind of go back to work. But I think I'll also then end up learning new things as well, just because everything that I've learned here, some of it is more connected to the not having to be other places. And some of it is applicable in the other circumstances, but I think I'll also learn things being in kind of busier situations, but also having time for language learning and that sort of thing. Like, I think something that I'm working on learning right now, and I will talk about this in my August recap, is balancing all of the things I want to do and all of the hobbies I want to have and projects I want to be working on personally alongside having a full-time job and things like that. Getting home from work, and then even when I'm tired, making sure that I do something language related, but not necessarily just making myself do that, but feeling good about it at the same time. I think a bit of that is definitely just linked to my mindset, and I can get myself in a state where I definitely feel more, I guess, excited to do these projects and things when I get home, or I can feel like it's just more work for me and I feel totally burnt out. So I think finding that right balance of discipline and getting myself to do what I want to do is going to be very interesting. So I think probably the most obvious thing that quarantine and this time to myself has kind of revealed to me about language learning is just how much language learning is connection for me. Definitely, as I said, this whole thing has been very isolating. Obviously, there is Zoom calls, there's Skype, there's things like that. There are ways to get involved, but I've gone from seeing my derby teammates and my roommates and people at school and all of these people that even if I'm not like very close friends with, even if they're just acquaintances in some cases, like people who sit next to me in class and stuff, I am not having any kind of contact with other people. And I think that kind of returning to language learning just gave me a way to kind of connect with people during this time, and I think that's important for me to remember just in general as life goes on, and maybe there are situations where friends move or I move or I just feel like I could use some other friends or a little bit more connection. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit lonely one night or whatever. And I think it sounds very obvious that, like, language learning is a way to connect with people. Like, clearly taking lessons in a language and talking to someone in another language, or practicing with someone else, or being a part of a community like this one online where there are other people learning languages that you can talk to, or creating your own platform like Polyglot Progress for me and communicating with people through that. Obviously that sounds like a thing, but I think that having this time where it was like so clear just kind of really highlighted that for me, I guess. It's not necessarily something that I would say that I learned during the pandemic and during all of this time, but I think that it really brought to my attention how important that is for me, especially because I did take prior to this about a year off from language learning and was kind of off and on prior to that, just kind of throughout all of college, I would say. So I think having a situation like this kind of bring that back to my attention and really kind of slap me in the face with it is something that I think that I needed in general. I think it's also made it pretty clear to me that I need to find more ways to get involved with the online language community. Like, I post videos on here, I try to respond to comments as much as I can. I occasionally will remember to go on Twitter and Instagram and stuff, and I would like to be doing more of that. I would like to find more ways that I can kind of talk to people, because I also feel like when I'm on kind of Instagram or Twitter, I'm definitely more of a lurker. Like, I'll read all the posts that people are posting, and I will occasionally give something a favorite or a retweet or something like that. But I feel like I'm not as great with being super, like, involved in the community, if that makes sense. And so I definitely think that that's something that I need to work on, and I'm hoping that in these coming times I kind of work on that a little bit better, and that maybe that's a realization of how to do that I have down the line. Something that I feel like I kind of did discover, though, is that the act of practicing or studying a way to communicate, like studying German or something, feels like a form of connection to me. Like, I think that even just sitting with a textbook or sitting with my journal and trying to figure out a language kind of felt like I was less alone. And I feel like that sounds so silly. But at the same time, I think I figured out the reason for it, which is that I think when I'm doing something like studying Spanish vocabulary or something, my brain knows that I'm doing that in order to prepare for some sort of conversation, but it also isn't sort of like expecting that I'm in that place right now. So it kind of is preparing me for an actual form of communication and connection, and therefore I feel like I'm making progress in that direction, if that makes any sense. And so I think having this time where I couldn't necessarily be meeting with people and talking with people, but I could be studying, felt like I was kind of preparing for those times where I was going to speak with someone, and it didn't feel like I wasn't speaking with someone because of this whole pandemic. It felt like I was just still in the phase of getting ready, and I was still kind of working towards a place where I would be able to say everything that I wanted to. I feel like that one definitely sounds very silly and very strange, but it's something that I've discovered about myself, and I think, like the other part of this, I think it's very important for the future, because there are going to be times in my life where maybe we're not on lockdown, but maybe I'm feeling a little bit lonely. Maybe I'm not feeling like I have as many friends as I would like, or even if I do, there are times where you just feel lonely regardless of how many people there are in your life. So I think having this knowledge that learning languages, taking language classes, doing things like that feels like a way to feel more connected and less just alone and with myself is a very important thing to know, both for my language learning, but also I think just for myself. And I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts on that, because I feel like it is kind of a weird thing that I just said. So I feel like I'd definitely be interested to know if you all kind of get that same feeling when you study a language, or if it really is the once you're communicating with someone that you feel that sense of connection. And then the last part of this is that I feel like it's just reminded me of how much languages can provide a way of understanding others, just because I think with things like the pandemic and protests and all of these other things that have really been impacting not just the people around me, but like the whole world, it really has just shown me that in my own language learning, I need to prioritize things like reading the news and learning about politics and learning about cultures and stuff, either of the countries that speak the languages that I'm trying to learn, or just like through the lens of the language that I'm trying to learn, those countries, views of other countries, if that one makes sense. So, for example, I for a while was reading German news on the United States, so I was getting kind of updates on what was happening around me, but I was getting them through the lens of Germany, looking at us. And I think this is so important. Like, I think it is so important to learn about the culture of the place that you're studying, so in this case, Germany for me, and I definitely need to do more of that. But I think it's also really important to have an understanding of how the rest of the world views the place that you live. Because I think even the most unbiased media in that country is still going to have the bias of being from there and having grown up there, maybe, unless it's someone who didn't. But I think having grown up in a place, having always spent time in the place, certain things just aren't going to appear, I guess, weird to you. So I definitely think that I need to put more of an emphasis on learning about culture, learning about politics, learning about current events, that sort of thing, in the languages that I want to learn, and learning about the countries that those languages are spoken in, the territories those are spoken in, etc. I think I have a pretty good gauge of that when it comes to Francophone stuff. I say pretty good because there are a whole lot of countries that I don't know much about when it comes to current events, when it comes to historical events, different things for different countries. But definitely I have a better gauge of the Francophone world because I have a degree in language and culture for French, so there was a little bit more of learning about the French Caribbean, learning about all of these other places that France colonized, and that sort of thing. But I don't have so much of a, I guess, working knowledge of things like the Spanish speaking world, places other than Italy, and even then I don't think I have a great gauge of current events and that sort of thing. So I definitely like to focus more on that because I think that was something that I took for granted when I was in school. With like my French degree, I had to take culture classes, and also I think it was just very embedded in the language classes I took even in high school and that sort of thing. You had to learn very random political stuff that maybe wasn't even that important, but it was something, and I feel like I don't always get that through language resources that I use to study on my own, so I definitely need to prioritize doing that, whether it's through reading the news, whether it's from some sort of other thing, but I definitely need to put a little bit more of a focus on that. I mean, I suppose the number one thing that I learned is that I put off language learning because of busyness, because of stress in my life, because of problems in my personal life, etc. But it is definitely something that I need to work on making time for, and I need to find ways to fit it in, even when I am busy. Like right now, even when I'm going back to work, finding ways to work around that. And I think it's definitely too early to say so far so good, but I think I'm figuring out something that I think will be a so far so good situation in the coming weeks. I think I've possibly figured out a way to make it work alongside work. I think the big struggle for me is making it work when either my mental health gets bad or when there's more so like stress or problems in my life as opposed to just busyness. This is definitely the lesson I've had from quarantine that's going to take the most work to kind of carry over into life, because obviously it was a little bit easier to be like, I should do this a little bit more when I had lots of time to be doing it more. And now I will be going back to doing other things and needing to kind of fit it in around my schedule. But I definitely say having the time to be able to study every day or close to every day really helped me re-find my love for language learning. I think that with taking kind of a year off from language learning and at some point in there trying to come back to language learning and then having to kind of put it back on hold, and prior to that being a little bit off and on with it and stuff, I feel like I was starting to feel this feeling of wondering if it was still kind of a hobby for me. I think I was kind of starting to reassess it as a thing of, well, maybe I'm just not that into it because I can't seem to make it work alongside my life and all that sort of thing. But I think definitely getting back to my roots of just studying in my bedroom, doing stuff for fun, picking it up when I'm bored because there's nothing else to do during this time, that sort of thing. I think it really helped me re-find my love for language learning. I definitely am so excited about all the projects I'm working on, so excited to do future language projects. Just all of the things. I definitely really love language learning. I really love making videos about language learning. I really love all the things. And it definitely was not something I wanted to put down. I think it was just me starting to get kind of imposter syndrome-y feelings, which we will also talk about in a minute, and just generally having been away from it for a while and not remembering kind of why I started to begin with. So it's definitely something where now, going back to work, going back to having a busier schedule, I do want to make sure that I find a way to keep it there, whether that is scaling back the amount that I'm doing or finding different resources that I can maybe adapt to my schedule a little bit better. I want to work on figuring those out, and I don't want to be putting projects down because I feel too busy. I want to be finding ways to kind of incorporate them in other ways. So, for example, recently one thing I've been doing is playing The Sims in French, because sometimes you're not in the mood to study. You are in the mood to play a mindless video game. And same with Animal Crossing. I've changed that into German, so I'm at this point trying to get things like that kind of in other languages. I want to start watching TV in other languages a little bit more. Just kind of things like that, where if it is that I get home from work, I feel way too burnt out to pick up a textbook. At least maybe I can get myself to watch a movie or something. And if I can do that, I can do it in another language. Also podcasts for commutes, things like that. I want to find ways that it can work in my schedule. I'm also trying to find ways that obviously like actual study works as well. I did some textbook study today, and it was because I kind of have found the places in this upcoming week where my schedule seems a little bit more open, and I'm putting it in there. So I think it'll just require a little bit more planning, a little bit more adapting kind of the resources I'm using, but I don't think it's totally impossible, and I think that I've learned that I need to find a way to make it totally possible and not at all impossible. Other than that, what feels like the biggest thing that I learned during this time is just that I have some pretty serious imposter syndrome when it comes to language learning. And I guess I kind of knew this previously. It's funny because I always said that I didn't have imposter syndrome for anything. Like, I was like, yeah, I just don't have it at all, which is weird because I'm so self-conscious and have such low self-esteem, I feel like, as a person. So I feel like the kind of person who would have imposter syndrome. So it's kind of weird that I don't. But in the last year, I've realized that I don't know if it developed later than when I was saying those things or if I just totally didn't catch it, but I totally have imposter syndrome for everything that I do. But I'd say one of the biggest areas of my life that is present is in my language learning. And obviously having that realization is very important, but I think what is also important is that I started to have realizations during this time when I was alone with myself. I was studying lots of languages, that I started to figure out what causes that feeling for me in language learning to an extent. I haven't like totally figured it out, but I figured it out to an extent. So for one, I've found that if I'm away from studying or I'm not really doing as much consistent studying as I'd like in a language, I start to feel like I have no abilities in that language and I can't remember any of it and I just cannot speak it or whatever. And it really doesn't matter what my actual level in that language is or how much I actually have forgotten or remember, whatever. Just that kind of feeling of having not done it in a while and possibly being a little bit rusty just feels like it puts like a block in my brain and I cannot access the language at all. And I also do start to get these feelings of like, oh my god, I'll never be able to learn this language or whatever. And I think this is where a problem of comparison also comes in, with seeing other kind of people who study or learn languages and feeling like I just can't be like them or whatever. Nice little imposter syndrome right there. But really it's just that I'm not progressing because I'm not studying, but also not studying doesn't mean that I've completely lost my level forever. It just means that I might need to refresh a little bit before I get speaking. And so my takeaway from that is that obviously consistent study is good, but I think almost more importantly than that in this situation is I need to find a way to still feel confident in my language abilities and still feel okay to return to language learning, okay to refresh a language after I do take a break. Because there are going to be times where I cannot keep a consistent schedule. As much as I'm learning to balance language learning along with a busy life, there are going to be times where my life gets too busy or my mental health gets too bad or there is too much happening in my personal life, and I do have to kind of put language learning aside for a week, for 2 weeks, maybe even someday a few months again. And feeling like taking that break means that I should just never study languages again is just not the answer. One of the first lessons I think that I had this kind of language learning dive during quarantine is that if I take a break from it for a few days, I feel like I just can't get back into it. If I take like a day off, I just think so much about all of the things that I didn't do and where I could be if I'd done those things that it's so hard to get back into it. And then imposter syndrome plays into that. I definitely do have this feeling of like, I'm not good at this, so why should I keep doing it and all of those things. And I think then that plays into polyglot progress where I'm like, I don't want to make videos because I don't know anything about languages and all of that sort of thing, when it's just not the case. So I think a lot of that is kind of more personal work that needs to be done, but I think that those are lessons that are just as important to learn. I think a lot of what I've learned about myself as a language learner is more just stuff that I've learned about myself and stuff that I need to talk about with a therapist. But I think that that's a lot of language learning and a lot of any hobby as well. So I think it's worth talking about here and just worth for you guys looking in on yourselves and trying to figure out kind of what those things are for you. I learned that Polyglot Progress really encourages me to study languages a lot. I think when I am making consistent videos, I am also consistently studying. And I think when I am consistently studying, I am eager to make consistent videos. I think that they just kind of tie into each other. And a little bit is that imposter syndrome of when things aren't happening super consistently, I don't want to do the other thing. But I think also just talking about language learning and interacting with people who are learning languages, even if it is me just lurking on Twitter and not actually talking to anyone, really makes me excited to work on my own language projects. And posting videos of me speaking German and getting feedback and stuff really makes me want to improve and to post another video and to post a video in Spanish and videos in all of these other languages. And I think that that's really exciting. And I think that when I'm studying languages, I just have so many things that I want to talk about. I really love learning languages. I love talking about languages. So I just want to make more videos. And so my current problem is, how do I take what I've learned and apply it to this life, going back to things like work and eventually whatever else may be able to happen again. And I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm working on it, and at some point maybe I will make another one of these videos where I just talk about things that I've realized when it comes to that sort of thing. I feel like I have these realizations every now and again of things that I could do better in my language learning and that sort of thing that don't necessarily come from me reassessing my goals. Obviously, I learn a lot from setting goals and reassessing them, but I think sometimes I just have these kind of more personal realizations about things in my personal life or in my language learning that could make me a better language learner. So I think that that is also worth talking about. And I think one other lesson that I learned during this time that is definitely applicable even in busier situations is that I learned how to have a habit and how to form a habit during a difficult time. Though this time at home may not have always been a busy time, it was frequently a difficult time. And I think having the ability to start language learning again and start to build a habit and start to build a routine when it comes to language learning and have plans for how I'm going to study languages for the next few months during all of that really helped me to get to a point where I feel like I can do that in another difficult situation and hopefully in a busy situation as well. So we will see about that one, but I definitely have higher hopes for it this time around. I would love to know if there is anything that you feel like you've learned about yourself as a language learner or about your language learning recently, whether it's been because of everything that's going on in the world or just because of your own studying. I would love to hear what it is. Maybe it's something that I feel like I could definitely stand to learn as well. With this shift to uploading once a week, I think the podcast is going to be coming out once a month now. Eventually, I would love to make it twice a month again. Obviously, as much as I would also love to make twice a week uploads happen again. So hopefully I will eventually get there. That is my big hope, is that I can somehow swing learning languages, doing Polyglot Progress like that, doing other stuff that I want to do that's more film related or creative related, and working all in one go. We're going to try it. I don't know though. So we're going to stay with the once a week for now, and once a month for the podcasts. If there is anything that you would like to hear me talk about on the podcast in the future, or any guests that you would like to hear on the podcast in the future, please let me know. I will see you on Wednesday, and remember, practice makes progress.